How authentically do you tend to show up on social media? And have you ever thought about what the consequences are of the positive spin that so many people put on their social posts? Like my guest, I grew up as a missionary's daughter and third culture kid. Both of us were displayed in happy family photos and newsletters that our parents used to raise money to support their mission work. Clearly, there were benefits of this way of presenting ourselves, but it also came with a price that we'll discuss in our upcoming conversation. I wonder, are you more or less likely to trust people who publicly reveal their bad selves as well as the perfect life? Hi, this is Marlena Fiol from Becoming Who We Truly Are, a YouTube channel that deepens our understanding of who we are, but also what we can become. If you find value in this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Doing so really makes a difference. And for a deeper look into my own life experiences and the challenging lessons I faced, we recommend my memoir, Nothing Bad Between Us, published in 2020 by Mango Publishing, as well as our new historical novel, Called, to be released in November. The web addresses are in the show notes below. I'm pleased to introduce Apricot Irving. She's the author of The Gospel of Trees. Apricot grew up as a missionary's daughter in Haiti during a time of extreme social and political upheaval. She talks about the dissonance she experienced between how she felt she needed to show up and who she really believed herself to be. Can you relate to this? I can. I also grew up as a missionary's daughter. There were clearly benefits. Apricot and I both learned to see the world through multiple cultures and various languages. But we also both felt the ache of believing that our parents' calling seemed more important to them than we were as children. And we were uncomfortable about the unearned deference that we received from the people that our parents were there to help. While Apricot applauds the good intentions of those who serve, she also compassionately and honestly exposes the too often unspoken dark underbelly of service and good works. And that leads me to ask the same question I asked earlier about people who show up positively on social media. Are you more or less likely to trust an organization that reveals its failures as well as its successes? If you'd like to listen to my hour-long conversation with Apricot Irving and also Suzette Goff-Jaffrard, who was her childhood teacher, I've posted the link to the web address below. And at the end of this episode, we'll provide recommendations for additional material about identity development and the benefits and costs of a multicultural upbringing. Apricot, I'd like for you to begin by giving our listeners a brief overview of what led you to Haiti and then a bit about your time there.
Yeah. So I was 6 years old when my parents moved to Haiti to be volunteer missionaries with the American Baptists. They had never intended to be missionaries. My dad was a forest ranger and grew organic vegetables in the desert, California. He got recruited, though, to run an agricultural center in the north of Haiti for a year. And we returned to the U.S. after those 3 years in Haiti in the early 80s. And we didn't come back again until the 1990s, when my father was still planting trees. We were trying to live outside of the missionary bubble, off the compound, although we ended up, for a variety of reasons, political instability, our teenage desire to be among the other missionary kids, moving back onto that little hospital compound. And that was 1990 and 1991. It was an unforgettable childhood.
The word missionary originates all the way back to the 1500s when the Jesuits sent their members abroad. The word derives from Latin and it literally means sent ones. How did your parents think of themselves and their mission when they first landed in Haiti?
Well, I think my parents really wanted to work in horticulture, do something to do with gardens. Dad really found a rhythm that he found really enjoyable for him to be able to talk with farmers about what they were growing in their fields.
To my parents, as I mentioned earlier, were missionaries in Paraguay, and we were constantly shown deference, even though by American standards we were quite poor, but compared to the poverty around us, we had so much. And then at the other extreme, there were the really wealthy Paraguayans, and I felt like such a backwards hick around them. So, Apricot, you are 9 years old. You've got crazy wild red hair, and you are on this compound in Haiti. How do you, as a kid, not the adult Apricot, but the kid, make sense of these social and economic divides that we're talking about?
Even as a kid, as a missionary kid, I remember feeling that dissonance between how I was supposed to portray myself and who I actually knew myself to be. But yet I remember distinctly that sense of being on display, of having to model something for people. And yet knowing when I was at home, I was the one pulling my sister's hair or kicking or like just being a kid, obnoxious, starved for attention, wanting to like fight back. And that bizarre gap between what I was supposed to be and who I was, which is a messy, ordinary kid.
So what are some of the most important legacies of having been an MK, a missionary kid, for you?
I think a different language, suddenly seeing the world from a different angle, is just how very complex the world is. And I think that's a great gift to be given as a kid. It can be difficult to navigate, but I do really value and appreciate that multiple perspectives is my assumption about the world, that we can look through things from many angles and learn a different truth depending on whatever angle we are looking through to see a situation or a story. I think the more negative side of the legacy of missionary status that I feel like I'm recovering from is that sense of taking responsibility for things that are not mine to be responsible for. And, you know, we centered ourselves as the heroes of the story in our newsletters, in the stories we'd tell to our supporters back in the States, as if it was our destiny to save Haiti. And I really deeply believe now and understand that a place like Haiti, any community, it doesn't need a rescue mission. It needs respect, collaboration. What can we learn from each other? But I think that recovery aspect for me is to clearly distinguish between the mistaken certainties of my childhood, where I thought that there was a burden on me to be a hero, and now, thankfully, learning more and more each year the humility with which I can move through the world instead.
And basically, third culture kids are kids who grow up living outside of their parents' home culture and often experiencing a lot of moves. And there's a lot of good that goes with that, as you just said, Apricot. But there's also a rootlessness, a restlessness, a home is everywhere, but it's also nowhere.
For me, I moved schools 10 times before I graduated from high school. So it was also very itinerant, jumping around from place to place. And I think, I went back to Haiti a few years ago with my sons. And I think even at that time, I felt like I didn't have a clear answer for myself of where is home. And then it was some months later, I was with a friend and I was thinking about, where do I belong? And I realized, for me, my answer is I belong to this earth. I belong to all the trees and all the rivers and all this natural world that we all belong to together.
My mother published a happy family journal, very much like yours, Apricot. We took
Interesting.
we took happy family photos like you did. We were paraded onto stages to sing happy songs. It's just amazing how many similarities there were. And then that whole thing about underneath all of that happy veneer, there was often so much sorrow and anger. And my question, Apricot, is why do you think this sort of positive veneer, I know it exists elsewhere, but why does it seem more prevalent in missionary families? Do you have thoughts about that?
I remember 20 years ago when I was first starting to research and write this book, talking with a friend about missionary newsletters and that strangeness of needing to present oneself, to tell the glorious story, to keep the funding coming. And she had not grown up in any sort of background similar to that, and so she was really startled by it. Now, jump forward now to the present. Social media, we're all presenting ourselves in this kind of glory light. And I feel that self-consciousness in myself now in regards to social media. I never want to give the impression that I have it all together, because it places a ridiculous burden on everyone around me as well as myself.
Yes.
To compare, to contrast, to feel either envy or contempt. And none of those are helpful emotions to really become better humans.
When you interviewed Ken, I believe it was Ken, a former missionary from the Ag Center, and he said, and I wrote this in the margins, the whole mystique of missionary service, the more you sacrificed, the more you destroyed your family, meant that you were even more respected for what you'd done for God. It proved you were unafraid. You didn't count the cost. I have to tell you that when I read that, it took my breath away. It's such a critical condemnation of missionaries, but I see some truth in it in retrospect regarding even my own family. I'm wondering, could you comment on this and your experience of that?
I remember that ache of feeling like, do I matter? Is my parents' cause more important to them than my sisters and I? And I think that that's a common thread in all the interviews that I've done with missionary kids, that question is a haunted one for many of us.
Yeah, my dad's calling always seemed to come first. In fact, my new book, Nothing Bad Between Us, A Mennonite Missionary's Daughter Finds Healing in Her Brokenness, traces the long, very bumpy journey toward reconciling with my father. This has been such a rich conversation. If you found value in this program, please do give it a thumbs up. Also, I'd be delighted if you posted your questions and comments that you might have. I'm interested and I'll respond each day. For example, can you relate to any aspect of Apricot's upbringing? In what ways does your childhood impact you today? In addition, just so you know, I'll be posting a new episode of this YouTube show each Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. For further information on the impact of our childhood on our adult understanding of who we are, we recommend the following resources. First, a TEDx talk by Florencia Escobedo Munoz on how identities are formed. Also, check out the TEDx talk by Mark McElroy on the benefits of a culturally diverse upbringing. And again, to learn about my own life journey and what it has taught me, we recommend my memoir, Nothing Bad Between Us, as well as our new historical novel, Called, to be released November 2nd of 2021. The web addresses of each of these are in the show notes. And remember, we are together on this journey.